If you've always wanted to learn how to fly but for some reason have never got started in the whole process, then this video is going to be for you. Maybe you're worried you're too old, maybe you're worried about the experience you have, you might have medical issues that concern you, or you might have just found the whole process far too complicated. Well, after 20 years of flying, I can tell you that the process of getting your private pilot's license, especially nowadays, is far less complicated than you might think, as long as you have the right approach. So I've created this, the Simple Pilot's Checklist, that covers everything you need to know to go from thinking about flying to actually becoming a pilot. And as with any flight, it all starts with the pre-flight. Just like we do a thorough check of any aircraft before we take it flying, the pre-flight is your way of getting yourself checked out before you take on any risks in your flying journey. The very first thing I'd say is decide what kind of pilot you want to be. Say you want to be an airline pilot and go and fly international routes with Qantas. If that's the pathway, then the first thing you should do is go to that airline's website and have a look and see if they have any online training courses, the list of requirements that they might need for the type of job that you're applying for. And some even have online webinars that you can watch to get more information about the pilot intakes that they have for that airline. But if you're not sure what type of pilot you are and you just know you want to learn how to fly because you've always just wanted to learn how to fly, then that's also fine. You can work out the kind of career you want to get into, or whether you just want to do it recreationally as well as you go along, but you need a starting point. And sadly, the starting point I'm going to tell you about is actually to do with your finances, because however you cut it, there are going to be expenses, some of them fairly big expenses, when it comes to learning how to fly. Now, I have made a separate video about how to organize your finances and pay for flight school, and I've got quite a few suggestions in there for ways that you can get started on your financial journey before you start learning how to fly. So I won't cover the specifics here, but I'm going to assume that you've got yourself in order, you know what sort of flying that you want to do, you've got your finances set up, and you're ready to start taking that first step towards getting your pilot's license. The first thing I'm going to want you to do is not actually leave your house, is jump online and find an aviation theory book that covers the theory exam you'll be taking for the type of license you want. Now, there are different types of pilot's license you can get in order to fly an aircraft solo. You can get a recreational license, a private license. When you've decided what type of license you want to achieve, and depending on the region that you're in, find the theory book that covers the exam that you're going to take and just start immersing yourself into it. Now, at this stage, a lot of the things that you'll see in the book are going to actually be quite confusing, but that doesn't matter. It's not about understanding every single concept in front of you. It's about immersing yourself in aviation terminology. Starting early with a little bit of understanding of basic theory will actually help you be more efficient when you do finally get into the cockpit and start flying. Then, and again, even before you get to your first lesson, I want you to start listening to radio calls a lot. Download an app like Live ATC and just start listening to all the aircraft in your local area. And just like with your theory book, a lot of it won't make sense at this point, but by hearing the words and listening to the way that pilots communicate with each other and air traffic control is just going to lighten the load on your brain a little bit when you do eventually step in the cockpit for your first lesson. Just before we go on to the next point of the checklist, one word of warning here. It can be very tempting at this point in your career, when you're all ready to go flying, you kind of understand a little bit, you think to yourself, I'm going to buy a headset, I'm going to get like a Bose A30, I'm going to get a new watch, I'll get one of those fancy Garmin pilot watches. No. Don't do that right now. This is the point, even if you have the finances to do it, where you don't want to get carried away with technology. Focus your energy and focus your expenses on the next part of your flying career, which is possibly the most important one, because that's when we get to the actual takeoff. Once everything is checked out and you are ready for your first flight, here's what you need to do next. But I will warn you, this first one that I'm going to talk about, some of you might not agree with this, but based on my past experience as a pilot, I actually think nowadays this one is really important. The first thing I'd suggest you do is actually find what we call in Australia a DAME, a designated aviation medical examiner. In your regions, it might be called something different, but it's basically someone who can give you a medical test to get you an aviation medical. Now, I would go and see this doctor and ask them to give you the type of medical that you will be expecting for the license that you want. But don't submit the results to your local regulator. This way, at least you identify any potential hurdles early on, and especially before you put any expenses into this career, but also there are certain conditions that may show up in a medical that can be addressed with a medical team so they don't cause you any issues in the future. I just think it's better to know about those early on. All right, here's where the fun actually starts then. This is the point when I think you need to go and find a flying school, and this involves going to your local airfield and identifying which outfits there actually do flight training. Now at this point, you might have one already in mind. You might have an instructor that you've heard about and a plane that you want to fly in. But what I would strongly recommend at this point is shop around a little bit. This is your opportunity to be picky because you are going to be spending a fair amount of money with one of these outfits and you want to make sure it's the right one. So organize what's called here in Australia a TIF. This will be a fully hands-on flight with an instructor when you get to actually fly the aircraft with someone sitting next to you. And it will give you two things. First of all, it will give you an idea of whether you like the person who's sitting next to you and whether you think they'll be a good tutor for you ongoing. But also secondly, the aircraft that they put you in will probably be the one that you fly for a while in the early stages of your flight training. And it gives you an opportunity to decide if that's the type of aircraft that you want to fly in as well. But just quickly on the aircraft as well, you don't need to pick the most advanced aircraft when you start flying. In fact, I honestly think, I might be a bit old school here, but I actually think it's better to start flying in a very, very basic aircraft. My flight training started in an old Cessna 150 and then I moved up to a Cessna 152. And it wasn't until I started doing longer navigational flights and night flying that I moved to something like a Piper Warrior with more advanced avionics. All you want to be focusing on at this point is learning your basic stick and rudder skills, learning your basic navigational skills, and learning your basic radio operational skills. And I think if you can do that in a basic aircraft without too much going on, it's going to cut your workload down and you're going to get those fundamentals laid down solidly, which will give you a great basis for the rest of your flying training. So now that you're on your way, here's how to settle into probably the longest part of this whole flying journey. This is when you're in the cruise. I think it's really important when you're flying to commit yourself to a schedule. If you can do 1 day a week, 1 day a fortnight, 2 days a week, doesn't matter what it is, but try and commit early on and block out that time in your calendar because this process is going to take you a while. The good thing about blocking out time in your schedule is that even if, and this will happen, even if the weather is bad on the day that you're supposed to go flying and you can't go flying, I still used to go to the airport. I still used to commit to actually being in that environment. This is a good way to practice things like emergency procedures without the expense of actually having an aircraft running. You can sit in the cockpit, imagine that you have an aircraft engine failure, and you can go through all the parts of the cockpit that you need to touch in the right order in order to manage that abnormal situation. The other advantage of being at the airport on bad weather days is if someone's actually going up and doing maybe some instrument practice, ask your flying school if you can go and backseat with them. Again, like we said with the theory and radio calls earlier on in your career, you might not understand everything that's going on, but you're immersing yourself in that aviation world and you're seeing where your pathway might actually take you. At this point, I'd also talk to your instructor about your EFB or your electronic flight bag of choice, the one that you're going to be using ongoing. Having an EFB that you can access when you're not actually at the airport is actually a really good way, I think, to learn about things like airspace, learn about things like fuel planning, weight and balance. You can sit at home and plan mock flights. You can have a look at all the airspace that you might be hitting along the way. You can have a look at what the current weather conditions are at your origin, destination, and en route. I want you in this phase of your flying training as well to check the weather every single day. Doesn't matter if you're flying or not. Doesn't matter if you're not flying for a couple of days. Every day, wake up and check the weather. And ask yourself the question, based on the actual weather conditions that are outside the window right now, could I fly today? Because that's a question you're going to be asking yourself as a pilot when you're actually flying. You are going to be waking up and thinking, oh, you know, do what? Tomorrow the weather looks all right. I might go flying with friends. You want to be training your brain to answer the question, can I go flying safely today? I'd also use this time, if possible, and if you have these resources at your airport, to spend some time now with aircraft engineers, the people who work on maintaining the aircraft that you're actually flying. I didn't learn this till later in my flying career, but having a good understanding of what actually goes on under that mysterious cowling in front of you in the aircraft is really important, not just from a practical pilot's perspective for things like making sure you're looking after the engine and getting the most efficient performance out of the engine as well. But if anything actually happens whilst you're in flight, understanding how everything is connected gives you a better understanding and a better chance to resolve emergency situations quicker. It's something I wish I would have done earlier in my career, but now I have a very strong relationship with the aircraft engineers that manage the aircraft that I own and fly now. And I make a point, if anything is ever being updated with the aircraft or being fixed on it, that I see if I can go along and actually observe it, and to some extent, although they'll probably disagree, but to try and help with the process as well. As your flight training commences, I also want you to take your theory exam early in the process. Don't leave your theory exam until you need to do it, which is usually just before you do your actual check ride. Do it earlier in the process for a few reasons. First of all, it just takes the pressure off. But secondly, if there are aspects of the theory exam that you weren't as confident on, it means that you've still got time with your flight instructor to go through those in a practical environment as well. Get them to show you what that actually means in the theory exam, in the practical aspects of flying an aircraft, because that way you will understand it better and it won't just be something that you got wrong in your test and you kind of ignore and you never really get for the rest of your aviation career. Now this next one is really only if you have the money available to do that. It's not a necessity, but if you can do it, I think it can be really beneficial in your flight training, and that's spend a little bit of money on setting up a home simulator. Now don't go crazy, don't get a full motion sim with 3 screens and throttle quadrants and all that. You really just need a computer, a joystick, and a piece of flight simulator software. Now I've used Microsoft Flight Simulator and X-Plane in the past. I think both are amazing, don't get me wrong, in their own rights, but from a flight training perspective, if you are going to invest in one or the other, I would suggest you go with X-Plane. You can never accurately represent the feelings and movement of flying an aircraft when you're using a flight sim at home, but what you can do is use it to tighten up your procedures, your checklists, and what you would do in emergency situations. And once you've completed the necessary hours, you've finished all your training, you've done your theory exams, you'll be ready for your practical flying test, which your flying school will help you set up. And when you pass, there are still a couple of things that are very important for you to consider at this point. Firstly, even if your license doesn't require you to do another check ride with an instructor for a couple of years, for example, here in Australia, we have what's called a biennial flight review. When you get your private pilot's license, you don't need to fly with an instructor then for another 2 years. I would still thoroughly recommend that you do regular flights with an instructor at least once every couple of months. I get it's hard because you've just been given the freedom to go and fly on your own, and I was really guilty of this, that I just went out and I thought I was the best pilot in the world, to be honest. I had my PPL and no one could tell me what to do from this point. But actually a couple of months after I did my private pilot's license test and passed it, I went on a navigational flight and I got very, very lost. I didn't know where I was. My navigation techniques were all over the place, and I actually had to turn the aircraft around and try and find my way back to home base again with my tail between my legs. It was a horrible experience, but the thing I didn't do was I didn't discuss it with an instructor whilst it was still fresh in my mind. Don't let your ego tell you that just because you passed your test, you can now do everything on your own without anyone's help ever again, because trust me, you can't. And the second bit of advice is pretty soon after you've passed your test, I would suggest looking at another rating or endorsement to add to your license that you can start training for. This will have 2 net benefits. First of all, it will mean you're sitting with an instructor again. And like I said in that first bit of advice, I think that's really good pretty soon after you've passed your exams. But it also just keeps your mind in that constant learning cycle, which is a really important mindset for pilots to have. So pick something like a constant speed endorsement, maybe a retractable. You could look at things like your night rating, or even something fun like trying a different aircraft type. You could get your tail wheel endorsement, or go for something like a basic aerobatics endorsement. Not only will those 2 actually teach you a lot more about stick and rudder flying, but they're also bloody good fun. Very quick aside, I do have my aerobatics endorsement. I don't have my tail wheel endorsement. I started it, but I never completed it. So I can only assume having that endorsement is fun. I really should get my tail wheel endorsement. The path to getting your pilot's license can be a daunting one at first, but like anything in life, if you just break it down into its small steps, and just like a good pilot would, approaching everything in a calm and considered way will have you achieving your pilot goals safely, efficiently, and in a really, really fun way. Good luck with it all. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks as always for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.